Okay, here we go. All right. I hope you were able to see and hear that now.
Yes.
Yes, Alokesh.
Good, good,
Yes.
good, good, good. Hello, thank you. Thank you very much for coming, all the panelists. Welcome. Good morning. I hope you've all had a wonderful breakfast. This is the Economic Times CEO breakfast, and the breakfast, of course, precedes the discussion, so we have already had them. And this is a post-breakfast discussion, which is presented by Accenture. Today, we will chat with top leaders of the consumer goods industry on adapting to the new normal. I am Alokesh Bhattacharyya. I'm senior editor of the Economic Times. I am joined by my colleague Suchetana.
Hello, everyone. I'm Suchetana, Senior Assistant Editor with the Economic Times. I'm sure if this wasn't a virtual event, we'd all be sitting together with our plates of breakfast, and it would be quite wonderful chatting with you face to face. Anyway, I welcome all of you to today's discussion. Even if it is virtual, I'm sure we will have sharp insights about how consumer goods companies are handling the COVID situation to stay ahead and how all of you are planning your next big innovations.
Yeah, we have a very powerful panel here today. So we'll just go for a quick round of introductions. We have T. Krishnakumar, President and CEO of Coca-Cola India and Southeast Asia. We have Deepak Iyer, the Managing Director of Mondelez India.
We also have with us Ajoy Chawla, CEO, Jewelry Division, Titan Company, Rajat, CEO, Creamline Dairy Products.
And from Accenture, we have Rajat Agarwal, Managing Director and Client Group Lead Products, and Anurag Gupta, Managing Director and Lead Strategy and Consulting. And we also have with us Sudha Natrajan, Director of BCCL. It's great to have you all with us today. Thank you very much for sparing time for us. We're looking forward to a very strong debate. Just a small context before we begin. You know, the lockdown is over almost, and all the smaller ones are still occurring in spurts, around the country to check the pandemic. But if we think about it, there were quite some unbelievable scenes of empty roads and everything shut, for almost 2 full months. And they were quite an eyesore. And possibly the only oasis in that desert was the friendly neighborhood Kirana store, right? It was our succor, it was our lifeline to food and to sanity and other things that we need. In turn, the lifeline for these saviors, they were the consumer product companies, right? Some of who you see on our panel today. And despite severe challenges, these companies managed their businesses deftly and they ensured the supply of essentials to the country.
The quarter one results, which have been pouring in for some time now, highlight the resilience of consumer goods companies in the face of these great challenges. Most companies have seen traction, as we were just talking about them, also for their health, hygiene, and nutrition product lines. And interestingly, even jewelry demand has not crashed despite soaring prices, perhaps because gold is so much associated and with the culture in India and has a social significance here. Overall, consumer goods industry's revenues and profits have improved in June, July, despite local lockdowns that continue to create uncertainty. There's also hope as analysts observe return of some discretionary demand.
Yeah, we are all waiting for discretionary demand to come back, right? But meanwhile, Fitch has also predicted a very strong rebound in the farm sector in the H2 of FY21, although overall volumes might remain lower than 2019 levels because of the disruption in H1. But at the same time, this could also drive rural demand because of dynamics that we all know. And there are multiple new dynamics also that consumer goods companies face today. It is a time for them to reimagine their business strategies and processes. What better way to do it than by leveraging technology tools such as analytics? So to get a deeper understanding, we will spend the next 5 minutes listening to some insights from Anurag Gupta of Accenture before we dive into the discussion. Anurag, all yours.
Thank you, Alokesh and Suchetana. Uh, Essentially, what over the next 5 minutes, just as some opening remarks, what we wanted to share with you is, and I'll just sort of project my screen.
Yeah, I had a bad time sharing my screen. I hope you had a better time
Hopefully,
sharing.
this will be better. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, fine, perfect.
Let me know if you can see my screen.
We can, yeah.
So I think we all have heard, this is once in a century episode. That's a new normal. There's a lot that we are seeing changing around us in terms of consumers, in terms of our businesses. Accenture every year annually conducts a consumer pulse survey, which we do across 45 countries to check what the pulse of the consumer is. Now, that was pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I mean, obviously we are seeing this rapidly evolving. So we've been doing our consumer pulse survey across 45 countries, including India, every fortnight. And since March till now, we've done it 7 times, covering about 45,000 consumers, just to see how is COVID impacting consumer behavior, consumer preferences, consumer choices.
That's really incredible. Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but 45,000 consumers in 3 months you covered in your service. That's fantastic.
So,
yeah.
I mean, these are unprecedented times. So obviously we wanted to really have an understanding of what's really changing, how are the consumers thinking, how is their thinking evolving. So quickly, sort of sharing just 2 or 3 quick anecdotes. So just 1 second. Anecdotes. I have 2, 3 slides, but just to give you, and I'm not going to drain through numbers, etc., etc. But fundamentally, what's really coming out, if I may say, is 90% of the consumers have responded saying there will be permanent changes in the way they will work, shop, and live. So that's really, I mean, the fundamental, I would say, input that we are really getting. Now, obviously, we all know how it changes in different parts. But there were some 5 or 6 key insights that we've summarized, and if you can see it on the page, that sort of summarizes what really is changing. And we are, as per the survey, we are seeing dramatic shifts in consumer behaviors and practices. First and foremost, shift in demand across categories. For breakfast, we were just discussing.
Sorry, Anurag, you may just want to speak up a little bit. Sometimes you are inaudible.
Yeah, thanks. So we are seeing significant shift in demand across categories, and we were just discussing how away from home versus at home. A lot of categories which were very focused on away from home versus those at home are seeing very different, boom. We are seeing boom in health and hygiene, whereas discretionary was non-essentials. And if we look at some of the growth data also of various CPG companies, that's reflected in how the demand patterns are shifting across categories. The second key and quite surprising, not for us also, was the shock to brand loyalties. I mean, the willingness to pay brand premiums, or many consumers, in fact, did come back and say we might not return back to the same brand, because COVID disrupted availability of brands. COVID disrupted the association that consumers had with their brands, with the value that they attach to it. A lot of that has got disrupted. So do we need to really re-establish our brand loyalties by reconnecting with our consumers? That's really an important question for various CPG companies. The social purpose, social and the impact and purpose of brands is also in a way up for discussion, if I may say. A lot of consumers have put that up as a priority when they establish their connections with the brands. More of them now want to see how socially responsible brands are, how environmentally responsible they are, what's the purpose of those brands. Channel shift, we're clearly seeing, very obvious, intuitive, the whole shift towards online, e-commerce. It's like saying, consumers saying, come to me, and businesses which are coming to them, channels which are coming to them are doing far better than businesses or channels which are saying, come to me. So to that extent, that shift of channels, the rise of low-touch economy, contactless, that's again becoming big across industries. If you can start thinking of trying to sell cars without having to walk into a dealership. I mean, that's the kind of impact some of the COVID is having in terms of consumer behavior. The same applies to how we run our businesses, how we reach out to our consumers. Consumers have also been talking about moving towards more local and moving towards more locally available products, which means buying locally from the neighborhood kirana, buying locally from supermarkets rather than going long distance to hypermarkets, buying locally relevant products and less frequent trips. Many of these changes are going to be very permanent in nature, given how we are seeing over the last 4 to 5 months, our survey has not shown any reduction in impact as lockdowns have not lifted, as we're limping back to our normal way of working. Parallelly, we've also been talking to a lot of CXOs across the patch, and this is just a word cloud of what we were hearing, and obviously larger the font size, more number of times we've heard that. And as you can see, the word which is right in the center is reimagination. So that's the one that most CEOs and CXOs have top of their mind. We all know it's the new normal, the contactless economy. How do I leverage automation, technology? How do I build resilience into my business? How do I build purpose in my brands? So all of these are essentially the vocabulary which was top of mind for CXOs. And the one that also is, if I may say, really top of their mind and really concerning them, post-COVID, there will be winners and losers. And obviously, depending on what business models we had, what business strategy we had, and how we adapt to the COVID environment, will determine who are the ones who will emerge as winners and who are the ones who might potentially be losers. Our view is those who believe that no, it's only about riding out the current crisis, and we just need to sort of stay on, ride the crisis, the same business, same products, same channels, same capabilities will hold us in good stead post-COVID, are the kind of companies which are and organizations which are going to be maybe on the other side, whereas those who are adapting and adapting fast are the ones who would be winners. And if you look at some of the key capabilities when it comes to who will be on the winning side, I think companies which have better connections to their customers and consumers. We've all seen if your salesman doesn't reach an outlet, there's no way to really service it. You would always have preferred to have a better direct connection with your customers or with your consumers. Similarly, your portfolio, how do you still retain a differentiated portfolio which is fit for the disrupted world? How do we have a more agile operating model? We've spoken about lockdown. Suddenly, a market could go into a lockdown. Suddenly, you could see demand patterns changing. So how do we really have an operating model which is more agile, which factors in this uncertainty, this variability to respond? Do we have, let's say, a demand sensing capability by individual markets, wherein you can then take those inputs on a real-time basis? When past data is no longer a good asset to forecast the future, because trends are changing and changing quite a while. So hence, agile operating model becomes extremely important. We spoke about digital commerce, digital engagement with consumers, building a more responsive supply chain. Supply chains in the past were built on efficiency. Now there are additional platforms which become very important. Responsiveness is absolutely key along with efficiency. Some running safe operations, making sure plants don't shut down, and building redundancies in our manufacturing, in our supplier base to ensure uninterrupted and safe operations become important. Variable cost structure, given how the demand patterns can be highly uncertain, how do we maintain profitability of our business? What are the new capabilities that we really need to bring in? And here, data becomes extremely important because managerial insights and intuition are based on past experience. So since a lot is changing, the managerial insight and intuition needs to be supplemented with real-time data and our ability to really use that real-time data to enable decision making, creating a more agile, elastic workforce, and obviously leveraging technology to really enable all of this. So the good point being, those companies who will emerge winners would have re-established connections with their consumers, understood how consumer segments are evolving, consumer behavior is evolving, and aligning their portfolio and their capabilities. So that's really what we are seeing emerging out of the survey. There's a rapid and a massive change that's happening. And we, as businesses, as consumer goods companies, we really need to look at each of our businesses and see how we should be responding on each of these dimensions. The one thing that we are reasonably certain is not changing anything will not be the answer. How much to change, how rapidly to pivot is really the key question that a lot of our CEOs and CXOs have in their mind. So with that, that was just a quick snapshot of how we are sort of seeing the results of the consumer survey and its implications on essentially CPG companies and, for that matter, organizations across industries. Alokesh?
Thank you, Anurag, for those insights. We'll jump into the panel discussion straight. I'll begin with a question to Mr. Krishnakumar. So it's been 5 months into this COVID-19 crisis. What do you think has been the biggest disruption in your company? And what are the biggest lessons that you take away from that disruption?
Yeah, I would believe that from our perspective and our business perspective, there were two major disruptions. One is we have a very distributed supply chain. I mean, we are possibly one of the most spread out supply chain in the country, almost like an oil company. We have 60 plants servicing literally in every state of India. That was one thing which really went down when the shutdown happened. It was a disruption. We are not planned for a situation where all plants get shut down. I think the second big thing for us was more the way our business is structured. I think our business is structured to do most of it during the summer, and number two, on away from home outlets. Both these were the most impacted. One was the period was impacted, and second was the away from home outlets really shut down. And this was possibly something we never anticipated, that there would be 100% shutdown in the peak period with all the supply chain also. This was sort of, in my view, the most unexpected happening of
Right. Alokesh, you're on mute.
So you know what, if I were to chip into what
Yes,
Mr.
sure.
Krishnakumar mentioned, the seasonality aspect of, even for us in April, we have Akshaya Tritiya, which is a very large jewelry and gold buying festival. And typically we are also start of the year with a launch of a new collection, etc. So very interestingly, we had a host of products and inventory build up and new collections lined up to be launched in April, and then in May again there's a wedding season in May and June. So that entire piece, I think the whole lockdown created a short-term disruptive impact, which of course is restricted for the first quarter for us, but nevertheless that is just something to chip into what seasonality he said as well.
Would you say that you're now more prepared than you were? Other lessons, have the lessons been taken well by the companies in your industry, and you think that will make you wiser?
Yeah, from our perspective, I think we have really been wanting to really do two things. One is to deseasonalize the products, and to deseasonalize our business, and number two is to really build a better balance between at home and away from home. So we have just accelerated whatever we were thinking of doing over years in a few months. And that's what we have done to really manage the present situation.
Maybe Suchetana, I could possibly build on that.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
I was going to come to you.
Thank you. So one of the things, actually, like KK said, I think in-home consumption has been a big challenge, and hence, building, in-home consumption has been good, but out-of-home consumption has been a huge challenge, and hence, one of the things that we have done just in the last 2 months is to launch cakes, which is a lot more in-home consumption to balance the portfolio that we have, where there's a lot of out-and-about impulse consumption for chocolates, for example, right? We are just test launching Bonvita Fills, which is a center-filled cereals in 2 states. We just did that 3 weeks ago. So I think some intentional actions to see how we can balance the portfolio between in-home and out-of-home consumptions. I think building on what Krishnakumar said. The other thing that's happened to all of us is, our license to operate got questioned. So the moment you had a license to operate in a particular scenario, but now there was a pandemic and there's a challenge with mobility, and hence the local authorities had.
Okay, we missed a little bit, Deepak. Your connection was unstable.
So in the spread of sell and deliver the products were actually questioned. And therein lies a huge learning. And I think, the whole thing about saying then managing this from the headquarters was not feasible. You had to get license to operate from 700 plus district magistrate and police commissioners, correct? And hence, how do you build local empowerment? How do you transfer the capability of license to operate in the hands of the frontline sales team who have never done this in conventional FMCG companies, right? It's typically the factories and the government affairs department who do this at the headquarters. That has been a big, big revelation and possibly one of the biggest learnings going forward.
Yeah, in fact, just to respond to that, also I wanted to first, just take a point from what Anurag was saying. Basically, that the past numbers are not the indication of the future anymore. As financial journalists, we depend a lot on reading up on your balance sheets and reading up on, annual reports to figure out what your strategy is, what your strategy has been, how you're seeing the industry. When I look at the annual reports of 2019-20, there is no indication of what the future holds because the strategy was completely different. There was no COVID, right? And when those annual reports were prepared. So it's quite a different scenario. So I would like to, just taking off from what Anurag was saying, I'll come to Rajat. And, before going to Raj, and Rajat, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, it's one thing to say that this is what companies should do and this is what consumers are saying. And it's another thing to do it, right? Do you see in general, and I'm not talking specifically of the companies here in the panel today, but the industry in general, do you see them adapting properly and well overall to the pandemic? Have they got a good understanding of what to do in future if such a thing happens again?
Look, it's a journey. Obviously, I think things will evolve. Initially, when the whole pandemic started, the view was it will get over in 1 or 2 months. At that time, I remember there were a lot of projections that were given, which were, that this will end in 3 months. And, and I think somebody made a point at the start that basically it's impossible to predict, when this whole thing will end. So I think if you see the last 3 to 5 months, I would say the consumer goods companies have done, I would say, well to adapt. I think going forward, really, since we're discussing at a consumer level, I think we see primarily 2 mega trends, which would be interesting to, to the extent what consumer goods companies respond. Some of them have responded, some of them are responding. One, I think, which is also being mentioned by several of the panelists, what we call as decade of home. So, are we really entering the decade of home? And therefore, should our entire, product portfolio, the customer interactions, how should that be pivoted towards, that particular mega trend? The second mega trend that we feel is really, at this point is every business is a health business. So, while previously, there was clear thing, and this goes beyond just consumer goods. So even, if you're going to a hotel, even if you are, watching a movie, maybe in some distant future. So every business is becoming a health business. So these trends, if you like, are really impacting, I would say a lot of ways in which consumer goods companies, I think KK mentioned, everybody mentioned, the focus on trying to, balance the portfolio within home and out home. And I guess, as I said, this is really work in progress. As Anurag said, there will be winners and losers. Things are still evolving, but I think if, really what we feel is on these 2 trends, if the companies can sort of focus a bit more going forward, I think that is something which you have to watch out for.
So, I wanted to chip in here, Alokesh. There are 2 other, let's say, elements or forces which have emerged. One which we need to take into account. There is, India was many Indias in the first place, yes, but during the pandemic, these many Indias started behaving very differently, sharply reacting to local conditions. And there continues to be a dynamism in them. Like, let's say in a particular month, UP and Bihar were booming. They were growing 100% over the previous year. And at the same time, Bombay, Delhi, Chennai was down. Tier 1 towns, tier 2 towns were behaving differently. States were behaving differently, thanks to the...
That more to do with local festivals and
yes. In addition to local festivals, there was this added layer of... So the local aspect of India behaving differently in different states is known, and different markets, and winning in many Indias is a theme which has been talked a lot about. But it became much more sharper and more dynamic during this period. The second piece that has also emerged, at least in jewelry, is we always had many cohorts. There were investment buyers, there are adornment buyers, there's wedding buyers, there's milestone buyers, casual, so on and so forth. And now you add it to that revenge buying and lipstick effect, etc. So you look at cohorts and you look at geographies with very sharp, and this whole market segments, the matrix, what we call as the opportunity matrix of segments, dynamically changing with time as well. So something is emerging here, something is going off here. So I think, and that bit, along with the fact that how do I serve them? I mean, they are sitting at home, and what do I serve them with? Because, for us, gold prices also shot up. So you need to also solve for price points. So this opportunity segment matrix, whom to serve, what to serve with, and how, all simultaneously in play, is what I would call as a massive disruptive force that hit.
I'll take this question to Raj. I'll take this question to Raj. How would you react to what Mr. Chawla is saying, that real-time analytics is becoming a nightmare because your expected behavior from consumers is changing and changing very rapidly. So how do you adjust your dairy business to that?
Sorry, there is a background noise. Some work has started. But I think dairy business, largely being in very short shelf life categories, we are in a very extreme industry where you have to tailor your demand to the daily, tailor your supply to the daily demand. So it has to change every day. And that in itself is something which the dairy business is always used to. So we are relatively quick to adapt to demand changes. However, the point being made, with the disruption in HoReCa, hotels, restaurant, caterer segment, offices segment, eating out, leisure consumption, that clearly has thrown all projections out of gear. And I think Deepak and Mr. Krishnakumar and Mr. Deepak mentioned that in-home consumption has gone up. So for us also, we find convenience foods going up. So ready to eat, ready to cook is going up. Things which are easier to cook, paneer, for example, has gone up. Ghee sale has gone up. But ice creams, beverages, buttermilk, lassi has really dropped very sharply. So these are different trends which are playing out differently in different industries, but I think same root cause.
Right. So, there are different trends in with different companies also, because the way you handle situations are different. And in this group, Titan is slightly different company, if I may say so, right, compared to the others. So, Ajoy, basically, I'd like to ask you, because, a jewelry company would be using a lot of labor, right, to create craft your products, right? So how have you addressed the supply chain and distribution issues? How have you addressed the labor issues? And also, how are you ensuring that, in future, if such a crisis happens, you're not going to let the lessons go waste?
Yes, supply side challenge. This is a rare humanitarian related crisis which led to both demand disruptions, as we've spoken about, as well as supply side at the same time. So on the supply side, because we have a lot of karigars and artisans who work on jewelry, even in fact, if you go a little deeper into the chain, even for diamond polishing, there's a lot of manual intervention that is there. And a lot of this karigar and skilled crafts people come from Bengal. 90% of Indian jewelry sector is heavily dependent on Karigar sector from Bengal. Of course, there are other pockets as well. The sourcing clusters and the production clusters are spread across the country, but the people needed to go back to their families. Families were worried about them. We had to facilitate, first of all, them to go back in a safe manner at the right time. Also hold them in a healthy environment when it till such time they had to go back. And here we had to work with the ecosystem, not just people who work directly with us, but also through our strategic vendor partners with whom we work. There are about 80 partners. So that entire ecosystem, first of all, had to be educated. Most karigars didn't know what is happening. They didn't realize COVID is a risk, firstly, for them. It is called as a rich man's disease. And frankly, for all of them, this was completely out of the blue. The second piece was to see how to ensure that the vendor ecosystem and the Karigar community, and we intervene strongly to be able to ensure that they are safe. And even now, I think for the next 12 months, this will continue. Now, as we speak, we are trying to see how to rehabilitate them back. So we are trying to work with our vendor community as well as with Karigars directly. We have got about 10,000 Karigars who work specifically for Tanishq. So we are trying to reach out to their respective villages and towns and trying to see if we can screen before they leave, at least before they leave the state. And then how are they going to come back? What is a safe mode to bring them back, whether it is flights or chartered buses? And
we've heard of companies, chartering flights and buses and trains to get the workers back. Are you also doing the same?
Yes, we are working closely with our vendor partners to be able to ensure, and also for those who work directly with us. And then once they come back, how are we ensuring quarantining and once again testing, checking, plus the insurance? See, their families are very, very concerned. When we speak to our Karigars, they say, I might be ready to come back. My family is very worried because they don't necessarily live in the best of conditions in all the places. So social distancing is a challenge. So we are in fact working on finding out accommodation in clusters. We are working on ensuring, anyway, we have what we call Karigar parks and centers, but not everywhere. We have them in certain places, but that approach we have to take. But the larger question that we are trying to ask ourselves now is, why does the Karigar need to come to the city to work or to the production centers? Why can't work go to them? Is there a way we can evolve Karigar centers in? So we've got a project M, we've kept it tight. It's a particular location in West Bengal, and similarly, we'll try it out in other places to see, can we establish a structured approach where we actually work flows to them? Because we are in a position where we don't, some part of the work requires manual, some part of it can be automated or using manufacturing excellence. But that requires a whole structural shift. And we've in fact started off on a pilot to see if we can evolve that approach. And then if we know that that pilot works, we can try and scale it up.
It will have major logistical challenges, right?
Yeah, it's a logistic. Yes. And the second and the fourth one, of course, is what has been talked about by Rajat as well, on how do we de-risk. So how can we have multiple sources of supply? So our own manufacturing plant, we have, de-risked, and we've created multiple sources, as well as certain products which we are doing with certain vendors. Can we do it with multiple vendors and try and also get cooperation going between them? So collaborate with the ecosystem to ensure that they realize that we are all in it together. So yeah, it's a lot of exciting work that has been happening. And a lot of this is happening on weekly war rooms.
And I think that is the reimagination that Anurag was talking about, which is coming out very clearly in surveys that he's done with companies. You wanted to add something else, Mr. Chawla?
No, I think the reimagination has been triggered partly by the way we have to, work. What we have found now is that cross-functional teams, which drive themes across the year, which are going to keep changing. Fluid mission teams, squads which come together, solve for a certain mission and go back into their work. And thirdly, war rooms. We now have weekly war rooms for taking on any challenge, be it a demand side situation or or a supply side situation, and sometimes a combination
Who's part of this? Who's part of the war rooms? You and senior management?
So there are 2-3 levels of actually war rooms are not necessarily it need not be me. It could be a war room which is relating only to the demand side or supply side or a combination. Where it's a combination of 2-3 factors, I am necessarily involved. And on certain areas, I step into war rooms. But actually, the teams are empowered to take those decisions, get on with it. We can't stop them because it is a day-to-day, weekly, fortnightly situation. And it has to evolve to that opportunity segment matrix. And of course, virtually, we can now do it without having any constraint in our mind of people need to come together.
I'll take this question to Mr. Krishnakumar. We're talking about supply chain and distribution network disruptions. So what are the structural changes that you've had to make? And what are the reimaginations that your company has come up with?
Actually, the way we handled this once we came to know what it was in 3 phases. I think the first phase was to really understand what really needs to be done. Because unlike most people, we have a very distributed supply chain. This is true for most FMCG products. We have, as I told you, almost 60 plants. We literally have 2 to 3 plants per state. And so to a great extent, we employ in the plants people from the local community. So we were not as stressed as most of the others on either migrant labor or any of these areas, even though small stress. The big stress for us was what Deepak alluded to, was the fact that we suddenly had to start getting approvals from 700 districts, etc. So the first thing we did when the crisis hit us was, we said, let's go silent. So we went absolutely silent to study the crisis. I mean, for 50 days, I suppose everybody tried to get something out of us, but we were just quiet. We just digested the problem. We really restructured ourselves to be able to connect and get those licenses, start the business, understand what we need to prepare ourselves before we could go in. Because our first priority was keeping our employees safe, developing safety protocols for every plant, every supply chain operation, so that when we started, we protected every single person who belonged to the system. And which has been which has yielded good results for us, because the impact on our people on anything like this has been the absolute minimum. And the second thing we said is we have to handle the community. So we went in and put 100 crores between us and the Global Foundation and said what we could do for the migrant labor and also the medical infrastructure. The third thing we did was to inspire our consumers. So we are lucky to have a great brand which for 130 years has been uplifting all over the world. And so we use that to really inspire people to create positivity. So this timing helped us to create back a fairly good supply chain. We were able to literally start every plant of ours. As we speak, almost 95% of our distribution is operational. The handicap has been only the fact that we don't have the away from home outlets opening. The last thing we put in to plug into this whole thing was really we got our portfolio broadened. We did 2 things. One is we were very well structured to handle the away from home. So we created magic price points which are affordable, but affordable to the consumer as well as for us. So for instance, 50 rupees is a very good price point. So we've launched packs at 50 rupees. So we created a pack portfolio which is very relevant for the grocery. Basically, we have all our brands at 50 rupees now, including Maaza, which is our juice brand. Then we also filled in the functional part of the portfolio, those which deliver functional benefits. So all this is what is helping us today to create a certain approach of the business between portfolio and route to market, which is helpful to get the business back on track. So it has been a 3-phased approach, I would say. The first phase was learning, second phase was experimenting, and the third phase is we now have a reasonably full-fledged operation. Not possibly getting the results that it should get, but we have a reasonably full-fledged operation.
Thanks, KK. And in fact, with your permission, I will just inform everybody that KK's son is a doctor who is working as a COVID warrior, and all our blessings and our thanks to him. So maybe a round of applause to KK and his son for supporting the country in at this time. Thanks for that. Apart from running your company very well, which of course is your core job, and for giving us the benefit of your son's expertise. Deepak, I'll come to you on this question, on the supply chain issue, but I was actually a little surprised, maybe pleasantly so, the other day when you said that you launched 5 products in the last couple of weeks or so, right? Couple of weeks, no? 5 products or
two products in the last 5 weeks, and some will be
okay, I
launched
got it
in the
opposite. Okay,
month
2
of
products.
March.
Yeah, 5 products since March. So my point is, at a time like this, when everybody is trying to save themselves.
That got hit by COVID.
Okay. Can you hear me? There's a connection issue at your end.
Yeah.
We can hear you. I think Deepak is
Deepak, I think
frozen.
Deepak, can you hear me?
I can't hear you so well. Yeah, I think I have some connection. Yes, now I can. So
you can hear me now?
That you wanted to around the launches, right?
No, so my point to you was that at a time when everybody is trying to protect their business, and their supply chains and trying to rework supply chains. You can hear me? We will come back to you a little later. Maybe Suchetana, you want
his line is just his line is just stabilized. You might want to take the question.
Can you hear me now, Deepak? Yes.
No.
I think there is a problem with his connection. So Raj, okay, I will come back to Deepak. Raj, basically, I wanted to know whether you have launched any products also during this time, and how have you managed supply chain? It's the same question that I'm going to go back to Deepak with when he comes back. If you are going to manage your business and make sure that you continue to grow at a difficult time like this, and make sure that your supply chain partners are in line with your thing, how do you actually manage manage to launch new products? Every company has launched, right? Even Coca-Cola has launched. I'm sure you have also launched. Deepak is back. So it's a toss-up. Who wants to take this question? Okay, since Raj, I've completed, you take it and I'll come to Deepak after that.
Yes, Alokesh, thanks. I think from a supply chain perspective, being a part of essential services, we got all kinds of government support. And we are anyway geared for running 365 days a year, whether it's floods, riots, strikes. Dairy businesses just don't shut down. Cows don't stop giving milk and consumers don't stop drinking milk. So all our operations, whether Holi, Diwali, New Year, riots, floods, everything is geared for continuous operation. And we got full government support and permissions, and our teams work day in and day out to make sure not even a single shift got disrupted in our production lines. In terms of new launches, we've launched 2 new products in the last 5 weeks, same as Deepak. So one was we launched 30% higher protein-rich Jersey milk, which has been positioned on immunity. So we've supported that brand launch with various kinds of communication and canvassing. So that has got a decent response. But the bigger response is we've launched, we've extended our sweet range, dairy sweets range. We've launched Mysore Pak made with pure ghee. And before that,
oh man, now you're making us really, hungry. Mysore Pak, oh man, too much.
Yeah,
so that would have been a nice end to the breakfast.
If we had met in person, then definitely I would have served that. But before that, we had launched Doodh Peda, which has been doing exceptionally well. And our Mysore Pak, again, has done remarkably well. So as I was saying, while there is a lot of media coverage on health and immunity, and we are also launching products, but the consumer is playing back a different story. So they are in the mood for a break. They are in the mood for something to entertain their families, their children who have been cooped up at home for many months. They are not able to go out, no movies, no shopping, no leisure. So small treats are actually doing much better than what one would anticipate. So all our lines are running full out. We are expanding capacities.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. In fact,
indulgence
Deepak,
seems to be the buzzword, no?
Indulgence is the buzzword indeed. Deepak, I think you did not get the question because there was a connection issue. What I was asking is, at a time when supply chain is under such severe pressure, how do you manage to launch new products and manage the supply chain disruptions also at the same time?
No, so quite honestly, I think it's a remarkable job done by a team. So when you do a new product launch, you even have to qualify the product, you have to qualify the line, you have to do everything was done remotely through a camera. People in the quality department are sitting in some other city, whereas the manufacturing line is in some other city. So for both these products, we qualified the entire line and the product remotely. remotely, and that's possibly, you know, one of the big learnings that we have on how we can start running some of these processes which hitherto we thought were very physical in nature, even virtually. So two things here. One is, you know, the resilience of and the resourcefulness of the team, saying that there was a need to put out something which will bolster in-home consumption, because we had to compensate the out-of-home consumption loss that we were facing. So there was a very strong, urgent, immediate need to balance the portfolio. And both of these were bundles that we had in our pipeline, but not necessarily for launch now, maybe a quarter or 2 quarters out. So the team actually worked to prepone the launch. So we actually did a preponement at a time when it was very difficult. I mean, just to give you another perspective, if we had invested a little bit of a lot of time and effort and some experiments on integrated digital factory, smart factory, and we actually had a supervisor run a line without him being available in the factory, because he couldn't travel because of the inter-district restrictions. So he was sitting in a different district, and our Sri City plant was in a different district. So we actually ran a line through integrated digital factory, smart factory, sitting at home. So I think some of these things have actually been a huge surprise for us. So when you talk about, you know, how to manage and how to shield businesses from such future crises, the truth is we don't know what the next crisis is. If we knew, we all would be, you know, fairly clairvoyant to have solved it much before it happens. It would never be a crisis or a disruption. But the fact is, they come. Black swan events happen. So while we are today focusing and saying what can we do to build it back in a pandemic scenario, tomorrow it could be a completely different scenario. So at the highest levels, I think, you know, planning for rainy days is what this pandemic has taught us. So it doesn't need you to simulate a pandemic to say what happens if my business tanks 40% or 30% or 10%. How will I manage cash? How strong is my balance sheet? Some of these things are agnostic to the event that happens or the crisis that happens, right? The second one is around what kind of capabilities you want to build in your team, or what kind of mindsets and behaviors, right? So if you look at capability to manage a crisis, I think this is an important capability today. So how do we get our frontline team, like I was talking, building capabilities to manage licenses for the businesses to operate in the front line? Or there's a premium today on anybody who has resilience and tenacity. There's a premium on people who are resourceful. There's a premium on people who have agility, like I think Anurag mentioned in his opening discussion. There is a premium on people who can collaborate and work in teams. We could never have made these new product innovations if the sales, marketing, RDQ, and manufacturing hadn't collaborated seamlessly. So if you look at it, I think some of these are possibly the biggest learnings that we take from the crisis.
Right.
You think we are becoming more social creatures because of the crisis?
I mean, we always were. So I think, you know, as a human race, look at it. What's the biggest thing people want to do is want to go out and celebrate Diwali. I mean, that's...
get rid of the mask.
Get rid of the mask. But you know what? We are social creatures. So 1 year from now, when the pandemic is gone away, we'll say, oh, I mean, those wonderful days of, you know, COVID, where we could nest at home. I mean, we are like this. So.
That's true.
I'll go to Anurag with the point that Deepak raised, that really the pandemic has been a master class when it comes to BCP. So do you think COVID-19 is materially changing organizational structures and workflows?
In fact, it's I mean, the way today organizations are responding, I see it in 2 parts. Like Deepak mentioned, KK mentioned. One is to manage now, and second is to plan next. So if you look at what are the imperatives for an organization, I mean, at one level, you need a very elastic and a more digitalized workforce. I mean, Deepak gave the example of a supervisor supervising a line while not being in the factory, right? That's an elastic and an agile way. How do you enable a workforce like that to be able to manage operations, to be able to collaborate? And Ajoy mentioned about, can I take work to my karigars at the karigar centers rather than they coming to my production centers? So the way work will now get executed, if we have to keep the crisis in mind and plan our organization and workflows, it will be in a far more distributed manner, low contact. However, agility, collaboration, a lot of principles will become far more important. So organizations will have to think of creating a more elastic and a digital workforce, newer capabilities. How do we leverage newer capabilities, whether it is analytics, whether it is digital, whether it is, Deepak mentioned about some of the softer aspects, premium on crisis management, premium on teamwork, collaboration. So there are new capabilities that need to be built. At the same time, if demand is going to be soft and there will be P&L pressures, so you also need more out of your organization. So you need higher productivity. So at one end, you need a very elastic workforce, agile elastic workforce. At the other end, you need a very more productive workforce and new capabilities to be built without it stressing the P&L. So it's a nice little challenge for companies to really look at. And in that context, our conversations with various companies, we have seen companies looking at revamping their operating models. For example, how can I drive greater agility and productivity by looking at my entire support functions? Can I centralize them? Now, in a distributed plant setup, I can't have my finance, procurement, logistics sitting in every plant. How can I still run those functions while it being a highly centralized setup? So looking at newer operating models, driving productivity of our workforce, can I run the same line? Because earlier production lines were, capacity of a production line was machine capacity. Now it's become labor plus machine because you don't necessarily have all the labor available. Can I run the same line? If I was earlier running them with 10 workmen, can I run it with 8 or 6? Or reskill some of them and look at redeploying them in a different way. So how do we do that? How do we digitize and automate our processes? Again, if you have to operate in a very distributed environment, it can't be a manual process. You can't have, let's say, a contract. If a contract has to be signed, you can't have physically the contract going to 4 different locations if there are 4 signatories. How do we automate our processes? How do we digitize? At the same time, build new skills. So I think it's a very important phase of how organizations need to be looked at, need to be planned, because there are challenges, but at the same time there are opportunities to really pivot the organization towards what the post-COVID world would require.
I'll take this question to Rajat. In this entire effort of re-recognizing your organization in a post-COVID world, how important is brand positioning?
See, brand, while Anurag made the point that basically, people are sort of moving away to more local brands. But I think fundamental to every consumer goods company, the creating the brand would remain sort of fundamental to their business. I think some of the questions which, obviously every company, and so therefore, I think, for every consumer goods company, brand strengthening, brand positioning remains the most important thing. Now, what are the key sort of drivers on which the brand positioning needs to be sort of done? Well, I'll be very interested in hearing the marketing gurus here. But I think from our standpoint, essentially the point I made that we see a big trend around, every business being a health business. So even if you are, let us say, in an indulgent category, or even if you are in a personal care category, how do you sort of give the confidence to the consumer that essentially you are doing the things in a hygienic way? And so that I think emphasis, I think KK mentioned around spending 100 crore for communities. How do you sort of come across as a more social brand and a sustain? In fact, when we have done our surveys, what we have found is that some of these things, the consumers, and maybe it's slightly more Western at this stage, but I think there was some signs when we saw the survey, even from an India standpoint, that the consumers would give more credence to, which is what is your level of commitment to health and hygiene? And second is, how much are the brands more socially and environmentally conscious? Right. I think the other aspect is, how do you have these conversations with the consumer? Typically, even in the West and even in India, some of these conversations have been more mass media led. Again, I think the jury is still out. But given, again, the whole decade of home that I talked about, people sort of hunkered down at their home, spending more time on the internet, on other devices. How can this communication become more a one-to-one communication and a conversation than a one-to-many, which has traditionally been the case? So I guess those are the aspects. I'll be very obviously interested in knowing what the panel has to say, but are some of our thoughts.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, I've just turned into a ghost. Right. It's a power cutting office. Okay, that's better. Now, thanks, Rajat. And in fact, we will take this question to all the marketing gurus, and I'm not going to point to anybody in particular, but I want this to be a discussion, a debate. Ultimately, you're part of the consumer products / consumer goods industry, whether you call it FMCG, and Titan is not FMCG, but you're still a consumer product company, right? Because the consumers buy it. And even if we look at it, even before COVID had hit, we were talking about how the consumer was changing. There were so many discussions, so many papers, white papers, this, that, on consumers are changing, consumers are more net savvy. Decision making is moving south in terms of age. Even the pre-teens are now influencing parents in terms of decision. And it is not only about the decisions to buy major stuff, but also, what food you're going to keep at home, what they want to eat, what they don't want to eat, what watch they want to buy. Yeah, the earrings that most boys sport these days, even the boys, right? I would never imagine that. But the point is that the consumer has been changing for some time, and the internet and technology, more awareness, more exposure, has made the consumer remarkably different from what he or she was, about 5 years ago. Now with the pandemic, everybody is at home, everybody is on the phone, everybody is on the computer, on the iPad, right? Everybody is on the net all the time, right? And all buying decisions are on the net, driven by that, driven by youngsters. What happens to consumer loyalty in this kind of scenario? What happens to brand positioning? Is the product more important than the message? Is brand loyalty more important than sales? Just opportunistically taking a thing from the market and saying, okay, this thing is selling more, let me just make a product and put it out there, right? What is your approach to the consumer today? It's open to everybody.
Maybe I'll go ahead. I'll go first. So I'm picking up a little bit from what Rajat shared earlier and what you asked. I think the first step that we had to take was to build a certain amount of customer confidence. So we anyway are an N equal to 1 business, in the sense we have to sell a product to an individual, it's a higher ticket value through retail stores. So we had the benefit of that piece. And in fact, during the months of April, we did about 500,000, what we call internally as empathy calls, just inquiring after our customers and saying, hope you're doing fine. Do you need any help? And if some of them had a milestone like a birthday or an anniversary, we were able to wish them, also ask after them. We were not selling them anything. Some of them had golden harvest accounts which were maturing. So we needed to tell them, do you want a refund? Do you want to hold on to it? Do you want to continue? So there were some natural conversations as well there. But this happened by the army on the ground, and it was phenomenal work while work from home. The second layer of response that we found, in fact, we are a trusted brand, and coming from Tata and Titan in a largely unorganized space, we had the benefit. But I think people would anyway expect us to do the right thing and do it to a very high safety quotient. So we wanted to push ourselves to say, can we be the gold standard in safety? And how do we, picking up from this whole bit about every business is a health business, and why should I come out and buy, and what will give me the confidence that your store is safe? So we actually went on a very hyper drive, and it's an ongoing journey. Every day we are adding layers and layers of new thoughts in making it safer. So we said the safest stores in town, and the safest workplaces, of course, but safest stores in town from a customer perspective. And that really found, a lot of people, we were surprised. We were doing the right thing, but a lot of people came back and told us, we didn't feel safe in other stores. We didn't feel as safe at home. And therefore we are, in the last few months, realized it's become a competitive advantage. We were not expecting it, but that's an outcome. Okay. So I would like to say, actually, brand loyalty has got amped and multiplied. during this period. Trust factor has gone up even more, at least for the category we are in. People are saying, you know, I would rather go to somebody whom I know and who's trustworthy. Maybe it's the nature of the business or the retail service experience that is required. The third thing that we've been ramping up very quickly is this whole at-home purchase. So, you know, and I know we will talk about digital, but essentially going digital, even video calling, even reaching out to home, try at home, minimizing the time they need to spend in the store, if at all they need to come to the store to do the final check, you know, before they buy a 100,000 rupee product or a 2 lakh rupee product, or, you know, a larger set sometimes. And the fourth dimension, which I would like to say, is that we have been doing a lot of work as a brand in terms of karigars, wholesomeness, authenticity of material, sourcing from responsible sourcing of gold from the right mines, LBMA, or even diamonds from the right kind of site holders, not blood diamonds, not, you know, so there's a lot of work that goes on anyway in the background as an organized, responsible player. But we found that customers, and also a lot of younger customers, are seeking purpose and purposeful and wholesome brands. The research that we found and what we heard, the many voices saying, I don't mind consuming, but I think companies need to take up their responsibility much more seriously. It was already happening. It's not something new. I think millennials and a lot of younger people saying, don't damage the planet, you know. Government can't do everything, but during this period, even the purposefulness and purposeful consumption from wholesome brands is a plank which is emerging. It is not yet emerged. I would say it depends on how independent players or marketers can actually leverage it in an authentic manner. It's a very tricky one to do. You can't just go out and say, Rara, I'm doing all this. Right. You need to do all that stuff and also tell the story in a meaningful, not kind of a chest thumping kind of way. It has to be very subtle. So to us, brand positioning is about right now being authentic, as authentic as we can be, but also in a nice way telling the story and keeping the customer at the center of what is it that is relevant for that customer. You know, for some people it is assisted selling through video chats. And for some digitally savvy, it's about, I don't mind just having a live chat with somebody who can help me out. And for some others, it is, you know, all that is fine. You just send me the stuff home, try at home. So there's a whole continuum of customers with whom you need to serve them differently and also tell them different stories. The advantage with digital is you can tell different stories to different cohorts and different segments and sustain that in a meaningful manner. So that's the way we are looking at the way brands are kind of, at the way in which we need to kind of talk to our customer.
Maybe I could go next.
Sure. Sure.
So this is in the context of, let's say, Mondelez. I think there are a lot of sub-questions there. You talked about consumer profiles changing, brand positions, values, loyalty, purpose, sustainability. So if you look at it, I think overall, brand positionings are important and are built over a period of time and should stay consistent. It is very tough to change positioning of a brand, and it would look a little out of character if you did that, leveraging one of these kind of, you know, opportunistic or scenarios that we are right now in, right? So I would think it's important to stay consistent. However, brand propositions or the manifestation or the messaging can be tweaked. Let me give you an example of Cadbury Dairy Milk. It stands for generosity, right? So what we did in this kind of a scenario is, how do you manifest generosity? So thank you as a campaign was a very big one for us. So the thank you bar, for the first time, we changed the logo of a Cadbury Dairy Milk bar in living memory, right? Likewise, we went in a campaign with fill in the thanks. We did a lot of showstoppers at 9 p.m. prime time to say, you know, how the star in every serial actually thanks the crew who has helped them put together the show, right? So these are some of the ways you can bring it out. Now, Oreo is about staying playful, and you could convert that to staying playful at home with recipes. And that's how Oreo's manifestation was when during the pandemic time when people were nesting at home. So what I'm saying is, brand positions have to stay consistent. They are important. Brand propositions can change. When you talk about brand values, they are built over years and they are a bedrock of the brand, right? And they're built on brand trust. So by Economic Times Brand Equity Survey itself this year, CDM, Cadbury Dairy Milk, is the #1 trusted brand, not just in chocolates, but across categories in this country. You know, and for a brand like that, it is important to stay in the character of the brand. You can't be seen opportunistic or superficial. Now, when you talk about purpose and sustainability, all of us have contributed to this crisis. So one of the ways you contribute to the brand persona also is in the thank you campaign. All the proceeds that we got, we fueled it through an NGO called Nirvana to actually buy insurance for migrant laborers, which was a current issue that was happening there. So where even the consumers feel, while I am buying something, the proceeds of this are going for a noble cause. And that's how you espouse, that's how you build a nice sweet shop in connecting the consumer, the purpose, the brand, and the larger crisis or the context that you are living in. But that aside, I think you asked a question on sustainability, right? This is super important. So as a company, this can't be opportunistic and limited to COVID-19, right? So over a period of 50 years, we have worked with 100,000 farmers in India who grow cocoa. So we in our 6 nurseries, we actually grow 3.3 million saplings every year, sell it under a subsidy to 100,000 farmers, who then grow 20,000 tons of cocoa every year, of which we take only 50%. It's not a contract farming, so they're free to sell to anybody. We eliminate the middlemen. The farmer becomes rich. The farmer is a part of a big ecosystem that we are a part of. Cocoa is a very key part of chocolates, right? That is the way you would. And the moment you go and talk about this today in the campuses when you're trying to recruit fresh talent, the premium that the centennials or the Gen Z places on the brand purpose, on the company purpose, right? What is Mondelez as a brand? Oh, it's doing something for cocoa farming. Oh, it's a company that turned water positive. It's a company that turned carbon positive. It's a company that recycled 100% of its flexible plastic waste, which we did incidentally till 21st of March earlier this year.
Wow.
Big things, but then this is what the consumer needs.
Deepak, you know, when you go to a local mom and pop store and you say, "Ek chocolate de dijiye," they say, "Acha Cadbury de dete hai." So it is, I mean, that is the connection.
Synonymous.
It's synonymous. It's like photocopy and Xerox. You say Xerox kar do. You actually mean photocopy kar do.
Cadbury de do.
Yeah. I'll come up with this question to Mr. Krishnakumar. Sir, Mr. Chawla just said that the trust factor has gone up during this pandemic. Do you think that in a world that is whose mobility is so restricted, brand loyalty still plays a very important role over convenience and perhaps affordability as well?
I think I'll take off where Deepak left. I'm also in the camp that brands are built over years and possibly even in case of us almost over a century. So you just can't do things just for the sake of a pandemic. See, taking a step back, most human beings are social creatures, and they are actually driven by a set of values, and these values actually shapes their emotions, and emotions shape behavior, and then the virtual cycle gets formed. So we as a company have always tried to play across all these aspects of humanity in terms of creating our brand. The biggest advantage we have is that a brand like Coke, which is our oldest brand, has the ability to connect people at the value level. When we really started the first sort of communication after the pandemic started, it was about talking about the human race and the resilience of the human race and the ability of the human race to really rise above the challenges and make things good for itself. So that was something which was possible because we had over so many years across so many events built that to what our brand would mean. So it almost interacts with people at the value system basis. So I think for us, we kept to whatever our brand stands for. And we have just been trying to ensure that we really emphasize what they stand for. But I think going to what everybody has said also is that we look at it from a holistic level. One is really ensuring that your brands deliver whatever they have promised over many years. But also, in our case, the brand and the company are the same. So we have to really ensure that we do the right thing. Like what Cadbury had done, we have something called the fruit circular economy, where we impact more than 100,000 farmers, where we are working on 5 fruits at the moment, where we have helped the farmers to increase the yield in their farms, and we really help increase the demand, at the same time buy those fruits and create products. In fact, many of our sparkling products today, we have added juice. And so we have continued to support the farmers, even virtually, in terms of really continuing the demo farms, demo work for them and the new stuff. So I think that, plus the fact that we switched to community during the first phase of our management of the pandemic, we believe goes to really support what our brands offer, between the value to the behavioral aspect of the consumer. Having said all this, I am not in the school that everything is going to dramatically change, and when this pandemic goes away, the consumer is going to evolve into a completely new thing. I think I got a chance to read the book on the Spanish flu, which was, I think, 10 times worse than this pandemic. The fatality levels were some 20, 30 times of what you see in this pandemic. It really hit the world terribly for almost 2 years, till it disappeared one day on its own. No vaccine, no cure. But the fact is, the world after that doesn't say that there was a Spanish flu, and then so they didn't really change completely. I think this is the present normal, and I believe this could be short to medium term, which I mean next 6 months to maybe 1 year, 1.5 years. And I think we need to really repurpose ourselves to be relevant during this period, and then watch how the consumer evolves. Because I, for one, I'm not going to write a book to say what should be done post-COVID, because nobody knows. You can really leverage saying that you know, but nobody knows. But if the Spanish flu is some indication, nothing changed. The world came back and did more of what they did before the pandemic. So we need to keep our horses. But I believe brands are too precious and solid for you to really change things at this point of time. But as a company, we are trying to really be more appreciative and supportive of the present situation for our consumers as well as our customers. I mean, that's important. But the brands still are really used to what they stand for. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll come to Raj with that question. You earlier mentioned that how you think that the hygiene or the health product line that you've introduced has not got so much traction. So do you believe when people talk about safe brands in the context of the current pandemic?
I think I agree with both Deepak and Krishnakumar. Food industry per se has to be built on trust. You have to trust the brand. And in the context of this pandemic, even more so, people are opting for safer, more well-known brands. They are avoiding, let's say, lesser-known brands or unbranded products. And that is the bedrock of food industry more than any other industry. Other than that, I think the question about brands, again, I agree with the gentleman. The brand cannot change its purpose or its proposition or values, overnight. So all of us have done communication, whether digital or ATL, on immunity, on, in the context of every business is a health business. So we've talked about the precautions we are taking in our plants. We've talked about how our products are safe. But that doesn't really, that's more a reassurance. It doesn't change the brand in any manner of the word. So brand has to be a very, very well thought through, long lasting thing which is built over decades. I don't think you can build a brand in 2, 3, 5 years. It's built over decades. So that has to be consistent. And coupled with that, you talk about the good things you are doing. So the work you're doing for community, the work you're doing for safety, the work you're doing for the farmers, all of those are part of the story.
Okay, so
I wanted to also step in and resonate on the aspect of positioning vis-a-vis competitive advantage towards growth. There are two pieces. On the positioning piece, I resonate with what the panelists have said. As a brand, you need to be consistent. Finally, Tanishq, if it is about celebratory, it's about relationships, it's about progressiveness, then that messaging needs to come through. The opportunity might vary. For example, when we had Raksha Bandhan, we broadened the base of what is a sister, and we said, all the nurses and all the healthcare workers are sisters. So we actually celebrated them and recognized them and brought that the warmth and relationship angle. Or for that matter, when we had the Ganesh Chaturthi festival, now we did an extensive digital campaign which talked about who is your Vignaharta. it was in the context of a relationship of a lady who is supporting 3 elderly gentlemen as a story. But we all know there are many Vignahartas in our life who have helped us. So I agree with our panelists that the fundamental positioning of the brand you cannot tamper with, and certainly not opportunistically. It has to be a well thought through exercise.
Absolutely. Sudha, you had a question.
Yes. While there are a lot of short-term and perhaps medium-term kind of changes that we have noticed in the ecosystem, I think all of us as professionals have risen to the demands of the situation. But is there going to be a complete change in your entire organizational matrix? Starting from, something which perhaps we did not even look at very closely and through these lenses earlier, starting from supply chain. How in the future do we maintain it to be uninterrupted? Hence, should it be geographically spread in such a particular manner? What is it today? What is the equation that we need to move to? Our production centers, again, the geography, where are our production centers, proximity to supply chain, how can it be affected in the future perhaps? Our distribution channels, we need to get far more omni-channel today. So if the kind of channels that we've been operating with today till now have been closed down, how has that affected our business? And what should be our omni-channel strategy? Or even a product portfolio mix on place of consumption, as you had earlier mentioned, in-home versus out-of-home, a balance between that. So actually there's every aspect of your entire, the way your organization runs that perhaps needs to be looked at with the microscope. So is that kind of a matrix, is that being looked at and is that being changed in your organization? I can
go, Sudha. So maybe I can take that. So Sudha, this is a pandemic which has touched everybody, but then there have been, at least in the last 4 years, there was something called a demonetization.
Yeah.
Which is also a very different kind of a pandemic, right? Which crippled us on a different sense. Everybody had money, but nobody had cash. And how it hurt discretionary versus non-discretionary. We have had a huge regulatory change. We moved from some taxation to GST. We have had a transporter strike for 11 days. As a company, we went through a malware attack. And I think there are in each of these 5 years, we can name at least 1 or 2 disruptions which could have blown a hole through your business. So, I don't think we need to start now. We should have started some time back. And good companies would have known that today, I think disruptions are here to stay. I'll just quote what I heard from Kareem. Kareem was the CEO for Google in Asia Pac 2 years ago. We were there on a learning tour, and he said something very nice. He said, the slowest pace of change you'll ever see in your life is what you're seeing today. So what it meant is that if you believe this pandemic is the biggest thing you're seeing in your life, it's possibly the most, it's possibly the most docile thing that you possibly will ever see coming forward, right? Now, if you have that kind of a mindset, then you will have to willy-nilly start preparing your business for this. Specifically, can you change manufacturing footprints very easily in India? Unlikely. Your factories, you can't just move a factory from one city to the other. It's linked to the people, employment, there are unions, there are exit clauses, there are authorities, there are so many things. It's not easy to put up a factory or exit one. Sorry, have I lost you?
No, we can hear you very clearly. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. The second one that you talked about, retail landscape, that is going through a tectonic change right now. And then maybe that's a subject of discussion completely separately. The third one is you talked about balancing your portfolio. It's huge. Today, one of the things that has saved us is our 5 rupee and 10 rupee portfolio, which for chocolates as an industry is more than 50%. And today, what we are seeing is actually a double-digit growth in this portfolio. So if you look at what's happened here, so if you didn't have a balanced portfolio, which offered a premium offering like silk for festivals like Valentine, and we come back with a recent campaign saying, after all this COVID, we are meeting each other now. So there's a I miss you bar that we have come up with on our silk. So currently,
very innovative.
That's probably the right thing to do now for that brand because it's all about love. And so that's the premium end. And then we have the 5 rupee and 10 rupee, 5-star, Perk, Gems, Cadbury Dairy Milk. We have the 1 rupee chocolates, halls, a 2 rupee Cadbury shots. Correct? These are extremely important. And then you have the mainstream brands, which is a 20 rupee 5-star, 20 rupee CDM. You need to have a balanced portfolio. The other imbalance that's there in our portfolio, overall we are okay because we have biscuits and Bonvita, which is in-home. Half of chocolates is in-home, something is outside. But I think we need to build back more in-home, especially on chocolates.
Right.
And especially with items like, cakes and Bonvita fills. So I think and you can't do it overnight. I think building brands and products and portfolio take a long time, Sudha. So it's a journey, but I think we are wiser for what, in hindsight, we all have 20/20 vision, right? So this is something that we start.
I'll take up the other thread of Sudha's conversation. She was talking about how the retail model is undergoing a change, where the Kirana perhaps is moving closer to the e-commerce. And do you see a different model emerging altogether? Mr. Krishnakumar, Mr. Chawla, Raj, whoever wants to take it.
E-commerce is here to stay. Because people, because of the pandemic acting as a catalyst, have started really using this as an opportunity to really transact. So whether it is the consumer or even the retailer, I think you find more and more demand coming through the e-commerce space. So I think the fact was this was anticipated. It is just that it has got catalyzed during this period. Companies like us, we were preparing for this. We had our own engagement site called Coca-Cola, and now we are really looped into every single e-commerce platform. See, the idea is now every company in the FMCG space to have a clear, holistic, strategic thought process of how this channel will work and how will it work with causing least disruption to the existing channels. Because India has a big brick and mortar approach to business, which employs a lot of people. So we need to be really big part in it, but at the same time, very finely balance it with what we have, so that it is accretive and not completely destroys the other one. So it's going to be a tightrope walk for some time till we see how this scales up post-COVID also.
Yeah, so the story will not be Kirana versus e-commerce, but perhaps a combination of the two.
That's what I would believe.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think, while modern trade and Kirana both are growing in their own way. Okay, modern trade again is, they had a few months of disruption, but they are back and you see the bigger players announcing more expansions. So they will continue to grow. E-commerce for most of the consumer companies, I don't know what the percentages for each company are, but so we grew 10 times in e-commerce last year. Okay, and this year we are planning to more than double. So that's and then there are within e-commerce, while e-commerce will stay, how many players in e-commerce will stay and how many will change their models? So there are 4 or 5 models which are being explored. So you have, the Amazon or the big basket model that is business to consumer. So there is an e-commerce site which sells to consumer. Then you have e-commerce sites which are into wholesale now.
Right.
So they are selling to retailers. So they are selling to Kirana. Then you have e-commerce sites which are selling to consumer, but through the nearest Kirana store. They are sort of tying the nearest Kirana stores in their supply chain. And then you also have some of the larger companies trying to establish a direct to consumer channel. Okay, many companies are working on that. So models will keep getting modified. Some players may either get merged or closed down or scale up further. So a lot of uncertainty, but a lot of excitement, I think.
So as new channels evolve and new channels are discovered, Mr. Chawla, I'll come to you. Do you think that digital, which is another very important piece of conversation these days, that should become more pronounced in investments?
In fact,
Yes, Sudha.
I think I'd like inputs also from Rajat and Anurag in this respect, that where does technology and digitization really play a far more critical role today in digitizing the entire ecosystem of an organization?
Yeah, we have a question for Rajat and Anurag exactly on those lines. Sudha, absolutely, you've hit the bottom.
Do you want them to go first?
No, Mr. Chawla.
Ajoy, you go first.
Yeah.
Okay. Immediately after you will come to Rajat and Anurag.
Sure. So there are 2 fundamental pieces I want to talk about. And ours is different from the rest of the FMCG companies because we have the consumer directly, in contact with us. So we have a very strong digital and omni, because also the ticket values are sitting at 1 lakh to 2 lakhs and even 3 lakhs. Quite surprisingly, we are seeing on the digital channel, our ticket sizes have jumped 3 times and our orders have gone up 4 times. So you're talking about a 10, 12x. And this is only the pure online. And if I look at the Omni, which is the, not really Omni, it's phygital. It's a combination of online, offline, leads being passed on to stores, stores reaching out, video calling, endless aisle, you know, that whole bag of what we are calling as digital leap ahead. We think from less than 1% last year, it could become a 20% of contribution of sale within a year. It's already hit halfway mark. It's already hitting 9 to 10%. So there is a rapid explosion because of obviously, you know, consumer changes, and these are likely to remain. So this as an engine has to be enabled. In fact, luckily we had started work on this over the last 1 year, and we could accelerate and kind of bring it to fruition. And there's a lot more going on all the time. The second piece is on what we like to call as n equal to 1, because now at a brand, you know, overall level, you cannot look at n equal to 1. You have to look at cohorts and geographic segments. And, you know, I talked about that opportunity segment matrix upfront. But really on the ground, the army has to win the battle with n equal to 1. And how do I equip the army with that n equal to 1 approach? There is something that you can do centrally, digitally. You can do social media, you know, hunting and farming, if I may say so, and pass on leads. We have our own encircle customer base of about 18 million people. So we are doing propensity modeling there, as well as we're looking at how do you massage that data and derive something out of it. So there is a lot of work going on that front to say, how can I do cross-channel between our different brands? We've, just to share with you, in the last 2 weeks, we have been able to reach out to 4 million customers individually through the army and enrich the database that we have at scale. And now based on this, we are going to do a cross-channel referral program and cross-selling between different, you know, between Tanishq, World of Titan, I+, and at the company level. So these two fundamental things, which is the n equal to 1 approach and the digital leap, which is enabling. And of course, we have things like Salesforce.com, and we have other platforms through which we are equipping the army. So these two things going hand in hand is a way forward that we see. And to enable this to happen, we need a lot of, let's say, cross-functional groups and fluid teams, which can actually bring collaboration between these multiple channels. So that's the larger story that we are seeing emerge, which is, you know, relevant to the question you asked.
So I'll come to now Rajat and Anurag with the question that Sudha was asking, and I'll just twist it a little bit. And basically, because you're consultants and you have the benefit of knowledge, vast knowledge across companies. So my point is, like Deepak was saying, you know, if somebody is there in a different district and he's able to manage an assembly line, you know, remotely without even coming to the factory, where really should somebody be, and a company should be putting in more money in terms of technology? Because see, if large organizations like Coca-Cola, Titan, you know, Mondelez and Creamline, their technology needs are vast, right? Apart from, like Ajoy was saying, you know, Salesforce.com and all the basic, and then you need IoT, you need, you know, many other stuff, you need robotics. Where should you be investing? Right? What is the technology spent? Obviously, they have to spend on technology, but the question is, what are the priorities that for them?
So, you know, I mean, look, digital, I mean, obviously, this has been a discussion for now, I would say, many years now. It's not, I mean, obviously, it has got increased the discussion during the pandemic. I mean, it's an interesting thing from an Accenture standpoint. You know, till last year, we used to report digital as a separate, you know, revenue for us. But from this year, we have stopped reporting it because almost every activity that we do now is digital. So, you know, we took that conscious attempt. And so sometimes it's also an abused word, if I may say so. But I think, I mean, from a consumer goods standpoint, if I see, clearly there are 4 areas where one needs to look at digital investments. One is really what we call as digital customer, which is how do you take your product more efficiently to your customers? And I'm not talking of consumer. So that is really the digital customer part of it. What we have seen some of the companies able to do in that is significantly gain competitive advantage, whether being consumer goods or automotive, which is really investing and making that whole, because what we have seen, one of the biggest thing that we have seen is that the salesmen were not present for a large part of the initial 2 or 3 months. And how do you sort of automate that entire thing? And now it's taking many more dimensions than just the, I would say, a handheld device or something like that. So that's one aspect of it. The second, digital supply chain, which is, I think, typically the planning cycles of the organizations was 1 month, some highly evolved, which was 15 days. But I think, and again, I would say this was a sort of a way it was already evolving, and these things will only accelerate it. The whole notion of almost real-time planning, and I think Deepak mentioned that we need to get more equipped to future crises as well. So the whole digital supply chain, I think, is the other one that sort of needs a huge amount of focus. The third is, how do you communicate with your consumer? And I think it was a very interesting point that Ajoy mentioned, is N is equal to 1, which is how do you have the power to have more personalized conversations with your consumers? So that's the third aspect, which I would say. And I think encompassing all of this, I would say, is the whole area of data analytics, and how do you sort of, this is a journey. I mean, there can't be an investment of, let's say, X millions of dollars in, let's say, for the next 6 months, and then you forget about it. I think that has multiple dimensions of technology, processes, capability of your organizations. It's a different skills that needs to be taken. So I would say, obviously there could be a fifth one around automation and manufacturing and those things. But from a consumer goods company, I would say these are the 4 key ones. And I would say this is a continuum which companies need to keep on evolving as they go along. And in fact, Anurag, as I come to you, this we have run out of time. It's 11:30 was the cutoff time. It's 11:34. So while you answer this question, I would also like you to, in addition, summarize the discussion and thank everybody.
I think just to amplify,
I was just hoping. I was just some reaction I was seeing from KK.
Deepak. I was also seeing the reaction from Deepak.
If you had any reaction?
We don't mind going on.
I don't know if there's some reaction to what I just said.
Okay, so Anurag, you answer this question. We'll come. Yeah,
Deepak. If you have the time, we'll come back. But I would suggest that possibly, everybody.
No. हमारे पास तो time है. We have a lot of time, Deepak, for you and for KK and everybody.
Get feedback from KK and Deepak.
Yeah.
I think.
Anurag, don't thank everybody now. Just answer that question.
No, I was just adding to what Rajat was saying, but KK, please go ahead.
Okay, we are waiting for. Okay, Deepak was. Okay, Deepak.
Okay, fine. So I think absolutely. So I think what you said is very right. So I think, see, everybody knows this. The biggest challenge is how do you make it happen? So that is where the challenge is. So 4 years back, when I was not very initiated in this data and digitally enabled world or business, right, I'd gone for a consultant summit. One of a very senior CEO sat on the stage and said, I make refrigerators and I make washing machines and all of that. So what are you doing about IoT? He said, I put some devices. Somebody asked him, what do you do? I don't know. It's not fashionable not to put the devices. I'll just put the devices. We'll see what to do out of it. It was an amazing statement, right? See, we still don't know what to make out of this completely or how to bring it alive. And this is the evolution that stage of evolution I was in 4 years ago. But from there to today, we now have a factory which has got a dark warehouse. So there's nobody there. It's fully run by robotics. That's our City warehouse. There we put IDF. We started small to say, let's connect devices. And that's how we're able to run that line in a remote fashion. If I had not connected devices, I wouldn't have been able to run. Right? We started with this order. The big issue that we all have is how does the salesman take the order? As my SKUs keep rising, how is he getting efficient? So then we said, okay, now enough of human mind. So can I get some big data? So now Google has a lot of big data. So we're layering data of maps, locality, what kind of locality, how affluent, not. Then now we have machine learning. So instead of me applying mind over 7 billion invoices that we cut every month, okay, how can I actually do this a little bit more educated with ML and AI? using AR and VR to say, how does my point of sales material look even before it lands in the store? Today, this is available to us, right, as a technology. We were blinded with visual recognition, right? So today, we all have this huge, like KK would resonate with me, we have this lakhs of coolers in the market between chocolates and soft drinks. What is a planogram in that? By the time you go through executing that, becomes a mess. But today, you can just take a picture, and there are enough softwares which tells you how many of the planograms are right and wrong, and how they can educate your salesmen on a handheld to do the right planogram. Technology is moving from being in the periphery to actually becoming center of strategy and possibly a competitive advantage.
I'll take this question to KK. Yeah.
I think Deepak summarized it well. I think any organization which does not really get technology into the center of its future business model is going to struggle, because it gives multiple advantages. Starting with, it gives you an online understanding of what's happening with your business. Number two, it helps you to take decisions which are data based. You really know. In fact, you know what's going to happen somewhere else. It's somewhere else which is very remote. And the big problem is how do you really create a culture in your organization which can absorb it? Because that is where I think the challenge will lie. And in fact, my famous statement in my organization is we should be able to really tune our production as and when a consumer picks up a bottle in a cooler in some shop. I mean, that's the level to which technology can be taken. But we struggle a bit because the environmental culture in India is also not very good. I think Deepak talked about coolers. You fit in coolers with anything. For it to be maintained and kept hygienic so that it works is tough. But the fact is we have no choice. I think most of us, because technology is available, people who can make the technology work for you are available. But organizations should create a culture which can absorb this as the core of their business model.
Raj, do you want to add anything?
I will be provocative here. You know,
Okay.
my MD, previous MD Bhaskar used to keep saying, you know, many of the technology companies or even sometimes consultants, pardon me, Accenture colleagues, sometimes make it out to be a burning platform. Boss, if you don't do X, Y, Z, you're finished, you know. And I think the one direction that he always told us is, what are you solving for? And I thought Deepak beautifully summarized, and, you know, KK added that if you know what you're solving for, that becomes a beacon, and then the rest of it can flow in. So this burning tech issue, and then should I put 100 crores behind this and do AI and ML and AR and VR and oops, you can see stars. Sorry, I interrupted you, Raj.
No problem, Ajoy. I think, so we are, as an organization, we are a little further behind, but we've deployed technology for various kind of analytics, of course, digital marketing, e-commerce, but largely in the supply chain. I think we've seen huge benefits so for us, daily supply, so any outlet that Deepak or Krishnakumar services once a week, I service 7 times a week. So my infrastructure is 7 times bigger to service the same outlet. And hence the cost of transportation can be mind-bogglingly high. So that's the first thing we try to solve for, that how can I cut down, how can I optimize my routes, how can I fine tune and predict which route I should, you know, run at what frequency and what products to carry so that I can get the maximum bang for the buck. And how can I optimize the routes? If some outlet drops out or 5 outlets drop out, can I reroute? And that is online today. So every day the routes are being generated, and that's something which we've solved for. Other than that, I think there is a lot of other opportunities, but as I think Mr. Krishnakumar mentioned, there is something which is an underlying issue. So we have a lot of refrigerators and coolers in the market. You know, for their categories, and this is a typical issue which we try to solve for, the Kirana owner switches off the visi-cooler or the fridge refrigerator in the evening. And he hopes that the product will last. So nothing happens to Coke. By and large, nothing would happen to chocolates, but dairy products will get spoiled. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Anurag, before Rajat sums up the discussion, I'd like to come to you. In most of the discussions that we have with most sectors, real-time analytics and investment in digital seem to be the two most important threads of conversation. You think that is what that should be more pronounced in organizations when their investments are concerned?
Well, absolutely. I think, in fact, if I were to use the examples of other industries, if we look at banking, any large national, private, or public bank is today servicing millions of customers without wanting the customers to actually walk into a bank branch. So all transactions should be done offline. Customer satisfaction should be on a net promoter score basis, very high. But the entire thinking is, and that's where they leverage technology very well. I want to service, if I have 100, 200 million customers, I want to service them with the best satisfaction and leverage digital and technology there. If you look at, let's say, telecom, there again, any national telecom, any company in India with a national player will have 200 to 300 million subscribers. They want to service those subscribers on a one-on-one basis, complete transactions, literally monthly, whether it is prepaid, postpaid, everything again if I may use the word, offline basis, so that it's not that there is a store out there that they want them to go to. So if you look at, let's say, metals and mining companies, they want to run their plants, which are in back of beyond locations, their mines, their plants, literally by leveraging digital. So, however, there will be a centralized command and control center, which will get all the information, IoT devices, sensors, data moving to cloud, real-time data. That's where some of these industries are really moving now. So, the burning platform for any industry is, how do I solve the complexity of my business by leveraging technology? If you look at our consumer goods business, the complexity is that there are millions of consumers that we service with our products. There are millions of transactions that happen across, 5 to 10 million kirana stores, literally on a daily basis. How do we really get control of our consumers, understand them better, and be able to also influence their purchase behavior? So I think that's the complexity that technology can solve. And now with multiple technologies coming in, this cloud, there's big data, there is AI, ML, the combinatorial effect of these technologies can enable CPG companies to literally have a one-to-one conversation, which would really mean you can have first-party consumer data for many million consumers, which can be managed effectively, and you can actually have one-on-one conversations. So that's where some of these technologies definitely come in. And you mentioned about analytics, AI. Literally, as I said, past data is irrelevant today. Now, anybody who has an AI or an ML-based forecasting system will have a far better accuracy of what's really happening or going to happen in the next few weeks. In fact, we are implementing this across a few CPG companies where you can actually forecast at a distributor SKU level, outlet SKU level, what's the sales in this month is going to be. That requires a machine learning algorithm that's learning all the time. So clearly, I think there is significant complexity that CPG industry has. They're dealing with millions of consumers with multiple transactions through the year. The frequency of purchase is not once in 5 years, it's like 10, 15, 20 times in a year, and with millions of consumers. But clearly, I think technology can play a big role. Like Rajat said, it's already, this digital and analytics was already a trend pre-COVID. The need for it has only accelerated, given the uncertainty that we're seeing now in our
Thank you so much, Anurag. I'll go to Rajat for your concluding remarks. If you could sum up this great discussion we had today and also propose the vote of thanks.
Oh, first of all, I'll thank everyone. I think, first of all, for staying 16 minutes over. It was, a fantastic discussion that we had. And again, thank you so much. I think there were 4 or 5 things which at least I'm sort of taking away, and I was sort of trying to make some notes, and some of them obviously reinforces what we are hearing from other clients and what have been thinking, and some of them were interesting thoughts which one needs to again think about more. I think the first thing that came across, at least to me, was to look at how do you sort of have a more balanced portfolio. given the whole changing, consumer behaviors during this pandemic, and making the portfolio more resilient. So I guess that's something which, at least came across multiple points that everybody made. The interesting thing was that, there is a greater focus on new product launches to ensure that, and how companies have been able to do it was very interesting during this particular pandemic. So that's one key takeaway that, I had from this conversation. The second was really, obviously this pandemic, threw in huge challenges on supply chain. So how do you make for your supply chain more future ready, more resilient, maybe enable a bit more redundancy in the system, more responsive? And I think the interesting example which Ajoy gave was, how to take some of the work around artisans, etc., to where they live. I think the Project M would be very interesting to see how that one evolves. But that was the second thing, was very interesting to look at and get feedback on. I think the third really around the brand, I think it was very clear, the panel's view that, brands are for long term, and therefore one should not tinker around with their positioning. But I think what equally also came out is that maybe it's also a good time to sort of strengthen the messages around brand values, around purpose, more responsible, and those type of cues. The companies would be better served if they were to, go there. I think digital commerce, the e-commerce, I think seemed like a no-brainer, and I think everybody seems to be thinking about it. I think Raj mentioned that there could be various flavors to it, and I couldn't agree more on that particular aspect. And I think again, digital, obviously, I think everybody thinking about it, but I suppose the sense I got is that maybe everybody has their own sort of priority, but maybe there could be an opportunity to look at the whole aspect of analytics and whole aspect of data, which I think everybody seems to agree with. But that's another area which sort of everybody could, maybe, and as we discussed, it is a continuous process, but people could look at even more. So those are the 4 or 5 points that I took away. Again, I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. It was really, phenomenal to get so many points of view. So, and thank you, ET, for sort of putting this together.
Thank you, Rajat. Thanks to all the panelists. Technology is a very, very strange beast, if I may say so. Yeah. At times it also tends to betray you. So here I had started the webinar and I was playing this video without realizing that I was watching it alone. None of you were actually seeing it. And I came into office today thinking ki office ka Wi-Fi acha hoga, so there will be no problem. And I had twice or thrice there were power cuts with me looking like a ghost. And I had booked a room for myself, for this webinar. So I went into the room and settled everything, pura setup kiya. And there was no connectivity. Internet ही नहीं आ रहा है. I was using my mobile hotspot. उसमें भी नहीं आ रहा है. So finally, after half an hour of trying, I moved away from that room, came back to my seat here, in the office. It's an open office, so now it's all very fine. So technology is all very great, as long as it works and as long as you know how to make it work. But terrific, discussion. I tend to say this at the end of every discussion that it was a great discussion, but today it was really a great discussion and it was fantastic. And lots and lots of takeaways, and can't thank you all enough. Accenture, our partners, all the panelists, Ajoy, Sudha, Deepak, KK, Raj, my co-host Suchetana. Thank you all very, very much, and stay safe and stay home. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.